Welcome to Flashback Files, the podcast where career and leadership lessons from the past guide your journey forward. I'm Josh Green, and here we'll explore both my own experiences and the stories of others, unpacking wins, doubts, pivots, and the moments of clarity that shape us as leaders. You don't need to have it all figured out. Leadership often shows up in unexpected places, at work, at home, and in the choices we make every day. By reflecting on aspirations, mistakes, and breakthroughs, we can discover how the decisions of today build the leaders we become tomorrow. Each episode blends conversations and personal reflections, all with one purpose: to help you lead yourself first so you can lead others with confidence, purpose, and integrity. Whether you're just starting out, making a career shift, or simply seeking more clarity in how you show up in life, this podcast is for you. Because you don't need every answer. You just need to start asking the right questions. Welcome back to Flashback Files. Today, I hope to talk or cover the topic of money and debt. Full disclosure, I am not a financial professional by any means. I'm not an advisor. I'm providing this through my personal experience in my early 20s as it pertains to money and debt. So if in your early 20s and money feels confusing and overwhelming, or like it's somehow already gotten away from you, you're not broken, you're early. I've been there. It doesn't feel great, but I do hope to help maybe alleviate some of the concerns and provide you with a little bit of a reflection in my personal experience to maybe help you realign your position today. So where do we start? Honestly, this topic, money and debt, it's an interesting one because we rarely talk about it with our friends and family. It's more about, or when we do talk about it, it's about all the good things that are happening as it pertains to what we spend our money on, buying things, experiences. But in terms of the topic of mismanagement of money, it's rarely brought up. So again, I'm not a qualified financial advisor or planner. I'm just sharing my experience as it pertains to me and my management, or let's say mismanagement of money and debt in my early 20s. So back then, money felt like a mystery and debt felt like a personal failure instead of what it actually was for me, which is a stage of life that can be navigated through with strategy and instead of shame. For me, I think I had a lot of shame, which had me focusing on the problem rather than focusing on the solution in terms of identifying steps to get myself out of debt. So since my early 20s, debt has shown up since. So I'm not saying debt comes out of the equation when you say enter your 30s. It might just take a different form, but it has shown up. It's gone up and down and sideways, and that's just because life happens, and I haven't always made perfect choices. All I can do is really just continue to learn from past experiences and aim to do the next right thing. So in my 20s, I realized money comes in very slow and it goes out fast. And maybe a few of you can relate in terms of having part-time jobs, knowing what you make on an hourly basis, and then also knowing what expenses you might have in your life. I wasn't formally warned just how expensive being an adult really was. I came across my first credit card, my first paycheck that felt too small, and then the first bill that felt way too big. I remember having student housing at the time and getting a utilities bill and just being shocked at the amount of money that I had to pay for energy in the house. For me, I remember thinking, why didn't anybody tell me this was coming and how to manage it? And that's where the confusion started. I was not prepared for the emotional side of money. Here's the part I think I needed to hear. That debt isn't personal. It's very much structural. As a post-secondary student, I was navigating rent, so tuition, and then I had a part-time job at McDonald's. So again, lots of expenses, but not income. But when we think about debt as a structural thing, it's really means to an end in some areas, right? We take out debt for houses, and many of you've probably taken out debt for student loans. So it's not necessarily a character flaw so much as it's a byproduct of being alive right now, especially for those again who have taken out student loans. It's a means to an end where you're making an investment in your future. As great as that sounds on paper, I understand that when you're in it, it's very hard to see that picture in terms of making the short-term pain, let's say, for the long-term gain. But what it really matters when you're in it, or at least for me, looking back, what mattered for me is how I managed it, not whether it shows up, because it will be there. So when I think about some early mismanagement mistakes, I remember this even goes back into high school, overspending my paycheck. So spending the money before I even had it in my bank account. I knew where it was going. Spoiler alert, none of it was going to savings. So I remember in high school, as an example, I worked part-time at McDonald's, and I was a basketball player. And for those that have listened to prior episodes, you know how passionate I was about basketball. My ego told me that I needed the newest pair of Kobe Bryant basketball shoes, as an example. So I'd say 95% of my paycheck went to a single pair of basketball shoes that I probably wore 3 times a week, 4 times a week. There was no negotiating that decision or second guessing. I just grabbed them, and saving my paycheck wasn't an option. I remember getting my first real paycheck and literally blowing half of it within 48 hours. That was before the basketball shoes. I can even go back and say that when I had a paper route, which was very labor intensive, where, obviously you're delivering weekly papers and they're heavy, my paycheck was $20 for the month. So I delivered papers 4 times a week. It probably took me 2.5 hours to deliver the paper route on a weekly basis. And I got $20. And that $20, I went to a pizza place, bought a slice of pizza and crazy bread, and that took up about 50 to 60% of my paycheck. So my association, money was something that I just used to fulfill these insane interests of mine, or food consumption. And again, the prospect of saving just did not come across me. And it's not necessarily because I was irresponsible, but I feel like I don't want to abdicate my responsibility. But as a young person, I wasn't really taught how to stretch money. The idea of saving was, thrown out there. You put it in a savings bank account, but I mean, that's one of only many vehicles, and not very efficient, that people can use to have their money work for them. Using credit to fill income gaps. I remember a lot of my early debt came from trying to look like I was doing okay when really I was in survival mode. Just to go back again to a prior episode, when I left that difficult internship / first job at the agency and moved back in with my parents, even though I made the decision to leave the company, my self-esteem was still pretty low, and I needed to portray this perception that I was doing okay. So I went out and bought a brand new car, well beyond my means. So technically, the money I saved not having to pay Toronto rent because I was living with my parents, it didn't go to savings. It went to a new car. That wasn't a great decision. I ended up struggling for a few years in terms of making car payments. I had a practice of not looking at my financial statements. And it wasn't necessarily because I was avoiding payments. It was more, I wanted to avoid the feeling, the reality of what my spending, the situation that it put me in. And looking back, I'd probably tell my younger self to be diligent with statements and lean into taking accountability for my spending behavior. I'd probably say to myself, you can't fix money avoidance with more avoidance. It doesn't work. It just starts to compound. I'd probably say to myself, know your number. And it's not necessarily not a budget, but just two numbers: what comes in and what must go out, and be diligent with that. Make sure it's as positive as you can make it, or at least neutral, depending on the situation. If I really paid attention to those two things alone, I think life managing debt would have been slightly easier, at least. Don't make debt emotional. Debt isn't a monster. It's simply math, and math can be managed. And again, going back to those two things, what comes in and what goes out. I'd probably also say start early. I don't care if it's my McDonald's paycheck, my first job, or is making $23,000 a year. Pay myself first. And I will give a plug to a book, The Wealthy Barber. That's where I've taken the quote from. But I tell myself, give your future self 10%, even if it's small. $10 counts. But even bigger is the habit matters more than the amount. So that habit of paying yourself first versus, taking care of anything else is a good habit to adopt. I'd also say stop comparing my chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 10. In a day of social media, I can only imagine, because we didn't have social media back in the time, but I can only imagine how much comparison goes on between an individual, young adults, chapter 1, so just starting out, to those individuals that are in their chapter 10 phase. Maybe it's millionaires that you're following on Instagram, or maybe it's somebody your age that is doing really great things and appears to be spending lots of money and buying nice things, but just staying in your lane and running your own race. In the center of my debt management, I felt like I was hitting the same cycle over and over. It was, I'd spend, I'd feel guilty, I'd hide from the numbers, I'd feel worse, and then just repeat the whole cycle all over again. The shame around money is often worse than the debt itself, as in my experience. And then the shame I tried to mask by, again, spending money on things and experiences to portray that I was, everything was okay. So if I'm to reflect a little bit more, I'd have to say that my 20s weren't about being perfect with money. They were more about learning how it works before it gets bigger. And I'd just like to reiterate that when you hit 30, debt doesn't magically disappear. There's a good chance of it showing up again and again, and in different forms. Sometimes there's good debt and sometimes there's bad debt. I won't be the one to tell you what good or bad is, but it will show up. And I know for me, it has, at least. The fear of the unknown and lack of understanding can be managed. And I strongly encourage you to get familiar with the management of money, financial literacy, even if you're not working full time, even if you're not even currently working and you're focused on your studies. Get the knowledge in now so that you can gain the financial literacy over time. If you try to do it all at once when you're just starting your career, it will feel overwhelming. But getting familiar with the lingo, compound interest, understanding different investment vehicles, the information's out there. If you're tired of reading because you've studied so much, get an audible subscription and listen to the audiobook when you're driving or falling asleep. Just start somewhere where you're starting the education process. Again, my personal experience was when I started to read books on the topic of money and debt and how to grow money, that sort of thing, I felt some reprieve and motivation to one, work on my debt, and two, explore avenues to have money work for me. And once again, I'm not perfect. I'm not providing a roadmap to become a millionaire. I'm just one person who put himself in a position where debt felt unmanageable, and how I came to temper a feeling of being overwhelmed and stress. And maybe in a future episode, I might dive into some of the books that helped me along the way. But for now, what I'd like for you to take away from this discussion is, if you're overwhelmed right now, just realize you're not behind. You're running your own race. You're not irresponsible and you're not failing. You're learning each and every single day. And learning does take time. That doesn't define you. Discipline does. And every mistake you've ever made with money can be fixed with small adjustments, repeated consistently long before you hit 30. Thank you for listening to Flashback Files. If this brought a little clarity, maybe took some pressure off your shoulders, share it with someone who's quietly stressed about money. Your early adulthood is not supposed to feel easy. It's supposed to give you the reps you need for the future that you want. See you in the next episode.